Tonight I want to invite you into a quieter layer of your experience, one that hums beneath the surface of thought, beneath the words you use to describe your day, and even beneath the labels you give to your feelings. There is a subtle, continuous current inside you, and it carries meaning in ways most people rarely notice until they slow down enough to feel it. Emotion is not something that arrives fully formed when a moment happens. It is something that unfolds gradually, quietly, before your conscious mind has labeled it, before language has come to its rescue, before you have even decided what it means. When you imagine a moment of fear, your heart may pick up speed before your mind has finished the sentence, "I feel afraid." When you remember a warm summer afternoon from childhood, your body may respond with ease long before you can place the memory on a timeline. Your nervous system is always at work, building meaning from smaller signals that your conscious self often overlooks. Emotions are living processes, not mere reactions or flashes of color on your inner screen, but ongoing interpretations of what is happening inside and around you. They are not interruptions of reason. They are the very machinery that shapes how meaning is constructed. They rise from the body, they bloom in the nervous system, and they are woven into your predictions, your memories, and the very way your mind anticipates what comes next. Some people think of emotion as something that sweeps in like a wave and then fades, but that is only part of the story. Beneath that visible crest, there is a tide that never stops moving, a current shaped by every breath you have taken, every shoulder you have relaxed or tensed, every heartbeat that sped up or slowed down a fraction of a second before you even knew why. To understand this is not to dissect emotion as if it were a foreign object. It is to feel it as part of you, as a living network that quietly informs perception, attention, and connection. Take a breath now without trying to change it. Just notice it moving through the body. In that simple flow of air, you can feel the beginning of this conversation between body and mind. Breath is one of the most direct bridges between the physiological and the emotional. When you slow your exhale, you signal to your nervous system that the moment is safe enough to relax. It is not just a metaphor. There are pathways in your autonomic nervous system that interpret longer exhalations as cues of safety, lowering the sense of urgency and softening the internal alarms that might otherwise keep you on edge. A long out-breath can feel like taking the foot off an invisible accelerator, a small release that creates a ripple of quiet through your chest and shoulders. When your breath deepens without effort, your body listens and responds, not because the situation has changed, but because you have changed the meaning your nervous system assigns to the moment. Often, we misunderstand what is happening inside us because we confuse the story with the sensation. A pounding heart can be fear, yes, but it can also be excitement before a performance, or anticipation before a reunion, or simply the effect of carrying a few extra stairs up to your room. Until the mind applies a narrative, the body is already generating experience. That is why emotions can sometimes feel like they come out of nowhere, because your body has been processing signals in the background before your consciousness has had a chance to catch up. The nervous system is a remarkable prediction machine, constantly matching present cues with past patterns and preparing an emotional response before you have even fully perceived the situation. This is why imagination feels real. The brain does not know whether a story is happening now or being rehearsed inside a memory or a dream. An imagined scenario that feels vivid enough can produce the same physiological response as a real one. Your inner world is not separate from your physical being. It is shaped by it, by posture, breath, muscle tone, heart rhythm, and the subtle interplay of tension and ease that your body carries like an untranscribed script. When you stand tall, your lungs have more space, your breath feels freer, and your nervous system can interpret that openness as safety, readiness, or calm attention. When you slump, your chest compresses, your breathing becomes shallower, and the internal message can tilt toward contraction or defense. Posture does not force a specific emotion, but it does change the context in which your nervous system interprets signals. Your body is a participant in the dance of emotion, not just a receiver of mental commands. And this dance has been with you longer than your conscious mind has existed, long before you learned the words for joy, fear, sadness, or love. Your body was already living inside these sensations, learning them through touch, breath, rhythm, voice, and the patterns of safety and threat that shaped your early days. Infants recognize emotional tone before they understand language. A gentle voice can calm a squirming baby because the body responds first to pitch, rhythm, and softness. Earlier than syntax or meaning, the body remembers safety long after memory forgets the details. A familiar voice can calm your shoulders without your conscious mind having to decode a single word. The cycles of breath, the subtle rhythms of speech, the cadence of caring tones, these are patterns your nervous system has learned to interpret as signals of safety. And even now, as an adult, a recognized voice can steady your breath, soften your muscles, and slow your mind in ways that logic alone cannot. Emotion is not a single thing you feel and then discard. It is a process, a series of signals, interpretations, and predictions that loop through your body and mind again and again. This is why people can feel dizzy with joy at a reunion, or why a laugh can spread through a room like sunlight breaking through clouds. Emotion is not contained only in the mind. It travels through groups of people because human nervous systems are designed to resonate with one another, to pick up tiny social cues and mirror them with astonishing speed. A smile is not just an expression, it is a signal your nervous system reads and responds to before conscious thought arrives. A warm, genuine smile can soften tension in another person's body, not because they decide to feel good, but because their nervous system detects safety first and then invites the mind to follow. Conversely, a hostile face can trigger contraction and vigilance even before a word is spoken. These processes are ancient and efficient, designed not for the calm rationality of modern life, but for survival in environments where signals mattered and delays could be costly. But in the world we live in now, where most threats are imagined rather than immediate, this system can sometimes feel like a double-edged sword. Your brain is constantly making educated guesses about what is happening next, and sometimes it makes predictions that your conscious mind does not yet agree with. That is why worry can spiral without any new evidence, or why hope can steady you before anything has changed in reality. Worry is not a random act. It is your nervous system trying to protect you by preparing for possible futures. Hope is not denial. It is your nervous system refusing to let go of the possibility of something better. These twin currents of preparation and prediction shape how every moment feels. They are not separate from thought. They are the soil from which thought grows. When your body is tense, your attention narrows and your world feels smaller, more urgent, more demanding. When your body is relaxed, your mind can broaden and see patterns and connections that felt invisible before. Joy, for example, does not merely feel pleasant. It opens your inner horizon. A stranger's face looks friendlier, a problem looks more solvable, a fresh idea feels worth exploring. This widening effect matters because creativity and learning often depend on seeing beyond what is immediately obvious. Joy loosens the grip of threat and lets your brain roam, and in that space of openness, surprising solutions often emerge. But emotions are not only about expansion and contraction. They are also about meaning, how your nervous system sorts signals into categories that matter to survival, to connection, to belonging, and to future prediction. A kind word can feel like medicine, not because the word itself is magical, but because your body has learned that certain kinds of interactions usually produce safety, warmth, or support. A harsh tone can activate the alarm system because your nervous system remembers moments in the past when a sharp voice was paired with threat or rejection. These reactions are not always literal, they are built from patterns of experience filtered through the nervous system's desire to keep you safe. This is also why memories can feel emotionally vivid even when their details are inaccurate. Your brain does not record life like a video camera. It reconstructs memories each time you recall them, filling in gaps with meaning and emotional resonance. When you remember a childhood event, your nervous system may respond as if you are there again, because the emotional tone of the moment is preserved even if the factual details have faded. This is why a childhood embarrassment can still make your face warm decades later, and why a remembered act of kindness can still soften you. Memory is not a perfect record. It is a guide, a system that prioritizes emotional learning over factual precision. The body's role in emotion is so profound that even basic physical states can shape what you feel without your conscious mind realizing the source. Mild dehydration, for example, can make irritability rise before you even notice your thirst. Hunger has the power to distort patience and sharpen tension. A short night's sleep can make neutral faces look threatening and small annoyances feel unbearable. These are not failures of mood, they are the nervous system reporting on internal conditions that matter to survival. Understanding this can feel humbling, but also clarifying because it reveals how much of emotional life is grounded in the body's ongoing dialogue with the world. And yet, within all of this, there is something profoundly human, a capacity to notice emotion, to step into awareness rather than react on autopilot, to treat feelings not as verdicts but as data. Feelings are not foolproof guides. They are signals, powerful, informative, sometimes misleading, but always meaningful. Anger can tell you that a boundary matters. Fear can tell you that something is uncertain. Sadness can highlight what you value. Joy can expand your sense of possibility. Curiosity can draw you toward learning. Each feeling carries a message, and the shift from being overwhelmed by emotion to understanding it can be one of the deepest acts of self-kindness. You have likely noticed that some emotions arrive without warning, as if they emerge from nowhere. But in truth, they have been building in the background, gathering momentum from dozens of small signals before your awareness finally catches up. The nervous system is constantly scanning, comparing, filtering, and responding, often outside your conscious control. This does not mean your emotions are irrational. It means they are often faster than thought. Consider how quickly you might flinch at a sudden sound, or feel a drop in your stomach at a message preview you cannot yet read. These responses are not evidence of weakness. They are proof that your brain is trying to protect you. Your internal systems are not just reacting to the present, but to what the present resembles. The brain stores emotional experiences not only as memories, but as patterns, combinations of cues, context, tone, timing, posture, and rhythm, and it uses those patterns to predict what might come next. This is how emotional learning works. It is efficient, adaptive, and deeply shaped by history. If a particular hallway once held bad news, simply walking through it later might raise your heart rate. If a song once played during a painful goodbye, hearing it again years later can tighten your chest. The event may be long past, but the pattern is preserved. And so emotion is not just about what is happening now. It is about what this reminds your system of, what this moment feels like according to the emotional library of your life. That library is constantly active, matching past and present, scanning for familiarity and warning. It's not always accurate, but it is fast. And that speed is what gives emotion its power. It prepares you before thought arrives. In daily life, these emotional predictions guide attention. Your brain tunes into what it expects to matter. If you've been hurt before in a certain kind of conversation, your mind will notice subtle changes in voice or timing in similar future conversations. If kindness has often preceded manipulation, your nervous system may remain wary even when someone is genuinely trying to connect. The point is not that emotion distorts reality, but that it colors it. Your nervous system brings emotional tone to every perception, not as decoration, but as context. This emotional coloring explains why the same words can feel so different depending on who says them and when. A joke from a trusted friend might feel light, even affectionate. The same joke from someone you distrust might sting. Your emotional context shapes the meaning, and meaning shapes response. This is also why misunderstandings can feel so sharp. Each person is bringing a different emotional filter to the same scene. We do not just experience emotion, we carry it into how we interpret the world, frame others' actions, and anticipate outcomes. Your nervous system is not asking, "What is this?" in a neutral way. It is constantly asking, "What does this resemble? What does this mean for me?" These are survival questions embedded deep in biology, designed to keep you safe. Emotion often begins before clarity. You may feel tension before knowing why, or relief before you've even consciously realized the threat is gone. This lag is not a flaw, it's a design feature. Emotional processing is layered. The body responds quickly to potential threat or safety. Then the mind catches up, assigning labels and stories. That's why a racing heart might confuse you until you suddenly remember the stressful meeting tomorrow, or why your eyes might soften unexpectedly when you smell something from your childhood kitchen. Emotional signals can ride on sensory channels, sound, smell, posture, touch, long before words arrive. Language is the final interpreter, not the origin. And sometimes the words do not fully capture what you feel. There is an emotional vocabulary in the body that speaks in muscle tone, heart rhythm, breath, and micro movements. These subtle patterns form the grammar of emotional life long before sentences are formed. You can feel this in the way someone's shoulders carry grief, even if they smile, or the way a tired voice tells you more than the words it's speaking. Emotion leaks. It moves, it reaches beyond logic and invites connection through resonance, not reason. That's why the right silence can say more than the wrong speech, and why a single sigh can communicate a day's worth of frustration, sorrow, or surrender. We often imagine ourselves as individuals with private emotional experiences, but your nervous system is profoundly social. It evolved in groups, shaped by the need to interpret others' signals and to send your own. This is why emotional states can pass between people like weather, unnoticed at first, but powerful in their effect. A tense room can make your shoulders rise, even if no one has spoken. A smile across the table can soften your internal monologue. This social resonance is not magic, it's neurobiology. Your brain mirrors the emotional signals of others through mechanisms like facial mimicry, tone matching, and even heartbeat synchronization. This happens quickly, beneath awareness. You often feel with others before you think about what they're feeling. This is empathy not as a virtue, but as a built-in function, one that can connect or overwhelm depending on how supported you feel. When you're well rested, safe, and centered, another person's distress can awaken compassion, but if you're depleted, their distress may feel like weight or threat. The difference is not moral, it's energetic. The system needs fuel to process emotion, yours and others. This is one reason emotional burnout shrinks empathy. It's not about caring less, but having fewer internal resources to carry what arises. Because emotion is shared, communication becomes more than words. Every exchange carries tone, rhythm, posture, pauses, subtle cues that your nervous system reads like music. When someone speaks slowly and with softness, your body may begin to match their tempo. When someone's voice sharpens, you might feel your chest contract before you've considered a reply. This is why arguments often escalate even when both people want peace. The body mirrors intensity, and each rise invites the next. What starts as a difference in opinion becomes a loop of rising emotional tone. The way out is not logic alone, but rhythm. A slower voice, a pause, a drop in tone. These are not just style, they are nervous system interventions. They shift the tempo of interaction, offering a new beat to follow, and in that new rhythm, the possibility of a different outcome. This emotional rhythm also shows up in relationships that feel safe. With people you trust, you often fall into shared pace. Laughter that sinks, silences that feel full instead of empty, pauses that don't need filling. These are signs of nervous systems in harmony, creating a mutual regulation that supports emotional balance. Emotion is not isolated inside one person. It moves between us, shaped by context and carried by signal. Even a glance can matter. Eye contact is not just visual, it is emotional. When two people meet eyes, something deeper happens. Attention sharpens, meaning thickens, the moment grows heavier. A compliment feels stronger, an insult stings sharper, silence stretches longer. This is because eye contact signals relevance, and relevance activates arousal. Your nervous system says, pay attention, this matters. That's why some avoid eye contact when vulnerable. It can feel like too much, too fast. Being seen is powerful, and power can be beautiful or terrifying, depending on the context. The same is true for touch. A gentle hand can soothe or startle, depending on whether it feels safe. Touch is never neutral. It must be welcome. But when it is, it can reset physiology faster than almost anything else. A soft hand on your back can regulate breath. A warm hug can bring down heart rate. Touch carries rhythm, two bodies syncing, creating a signal of shared presence. It is ancient language without words. Voice, too, carries more than sound. A familiar voice, one associated with comfort, can settle the nervous system without needing explanation. The cadence, the pauses, the unique shape of someone's way of speaking, these are signals of safety learned over time. The body remembers who felt like shelter. That is why people call loved ones not only for advice, but for the sound of their voice. The voice becomes the medicine. No solution is needed, only the rhythm. That rhythm can guide breath, calm tension, and remind the nervous system that safety is still possible. And just as tone can heal, it can also harm. A sharp voice can cut faster than a raised hand. Words are not the only carriers of emotional weight. The sound and delivery often land first. The nervous system hears intention faster than content. Emotion is physical, social, rhythmic, and predictive. It lives in the way you breathe, the way you interpret, the way you respond before you explain. And it is shaped not just by the moment, but by the moments that came before, the patterns you learned, the safety you experienced or lacked, the habits your body built. Emotional habits are real. If you often worry at night, the nervous system may begin to associate night with alertness. If you often feel peace when walking by trees, the body may begin to settle the moment leaves come into view. These links form without conscious permission. They are built through repetition, but they are not permanent. They can be softened, shifted, updated. Just as fear can be learned, safety can be practiced. The nervous system is not fixed. It is responsive. And with enough repetition, even a long-standing pattern can find a new shape. You might notice certain moods arrive in specific places. A room may carry the echo of past stress. A chair may remind your body of tiredness. These associations are not illusions. They are emotional habits, the mind's way of tying location and state into a shortcut. This is why small rituals can help. Lighting a candle, making tea, stretching gently. These acts can become signals. They tell the nervous system, we are entering a new mode. And over time, that association becomes a doorway. The moment the ritual begins, the emotional tone starts to shift. This is not self-trickery. It is emotional design. You are offering your system a pattern to recognize, a reason to change states. The more consistently you do this, the more accessible certain emotional states become. Calm is not always spontaneous. It can be invited. It can be trained. You may have noticed that not all emotions feel clean or simple. Some arrive in layers, others in contradictions. You might feel love and anger in the same breath, or grief mixed with gratitude, or joy tangled with guilt. These overlapping states are not errors in the system, they are proof of its depth. The nervous system is not a single-track processor, assigning one label at a time. It is a multi-sensory, multi-channel interpreter of experience, constantly absorbing data from body, environment, memory, and imagination. When two or more emotional signals collide, the result may feel confusing, but it is often closer to truth. Life is rarely neat. The nervous system knows this. It prepares you to carry tension, complexity, even ambiguity, because those are the conditions real life often presents. Consider how a parent might feel exhausted and overwhelmed, yet deeply in love with their child in the same moment. Or how someone might walk away from a toxic relationship and still miss the sound of that person's laugh. These are not failures of emotional clarity. They are examples of the nervous system trying to hold multiple meanings at once. And meaning is the core currency of emotion. The body does not simply react to what happens. It reacts to what the event means in the context of your lived experience. Meaning is layered. A small gesture might carry decades of weight if it echoes an old wound or fulfills a long unmet need. A sentence spoken in a specific tone might break open emotion, not because of the words themselves, but because of what they represent: validation, rejection, memory, or hope. The nervous system is not literal. It is interpretive. It is always assigning relevance. That relevance shapes intensity. Something minor in appearance may hit like a storm if it touches a core belief. Something major may feel oddly distant if your nervous system is overwhelmed and chooses shutdown over sensation. This is why emotional reactions vary so widely from person to person, not because some people are more dramatic, but because they carry different maps of meaning. One person hears a song and smiles, another hears it and weeps. The difference is in the emotional history, the layered associations the nervous system has built across time. Some emotions are fast, others slow. Fear can rise in an instant. Grief often arrives in waves, sometimes long after the loss. Joy can sparkle and vanish. Contentment may hum quietly for hours. Each emotional tone carries its own tempo, and your body responds accordingly, with changes in heart rate, muscle tension, breath, and attention. These physiological shifts are not decorative, they are functional. Fear pulls attention tightly inward, scanning for danger. Joy allows attention to widen, exploring possibilities. Sadness invites slowing, conserving energy. Anger fuels action, preparing the body to confront or defend. These states are not flaws, they are adaptations. Even the uncomfortable ones have purposes: to alert you, to protect you, to signal need, to invite change. When you begin to see emotion as adaptive rather than disruptive, something shifts. The emotional life becomes less of a battleground and more of a conversation. You learn to ask, what is this state trying to do for me? What signal is it sending? What need might it be revealing? It's important to remember that the nervous system does not always prioritize truth, it prioritizes survival. This means that sometimes it will amplify a threat that is no longer present, or downplay a connection that could offer support, or avoid a feeling that once overwhelmed you. These are not signs of dysfunction, but of learned patterns. If a certain emotional state once caused unbearable pain, your system may now try to avoid anything that resembles it. If vulnerability was once punished, it may now feel dangerous, even when you're surrounded by kindness. These protective patterns often form early, and they make sense in the context they were born in. But the nervous system, while incredibly efficient, is also teachable. With enough repetition, it can learn that what once was dangerous is now safe, that what once felt overwhelming can now be experienced with support. Emotional change begins not with force, but with repeated evidence. Each safe moment becomes a new data point. Each kind response, each deep breath, each repaired rupture helps the nervous system rewire its predictions. This is why certain practices, breathwork, mindfulness, therapy, supportive conversation, can feel so powerful. They do not erase emotion. They help the nervous system update its maps. When you consistently pair a once threatening cue with a calming response, the brain learns that the old rule no longer applies. This is not cognitive trickery, it is biological change. Synaptic pathways weaken or strengthen based on use. This is neuroplasticity in action, the ability of the brain to reshape itself based on new experience. And this process is not limited to youth. It continues across the lifespan, quietly shaping emotional tendencies through habit and repetition. That is why adults can still learn to self-soothe, to express needs, to tolerate discomfort, and to build emotional strength. The system is never frozen. It is adaptive by design. Emotion is also shaped by attention. What you focus on expands in your emotional field. When attention locks onto threat, your body prepares accordingly. Muscles tighten, breath shortens, imagination narrows to worst-case outcomes. But when attention turns toward what is working, even something as small as a warm mug in your hands, the emotional tone shifts. This is not toxic positivity or denial. It is emotional rebalancing. The nervous system responds to signals of safety and beauty just as it does to signals of danger. A leaf moving in sunlight, the sound of laughter in the distance, the feel of your own pulse. These are sensory cues that the system can use to soften vigilance. They are not solutions to life's problems, but reminders that not all is threat. This shift in attention is subtle but powerful. Over time, it helps retrain emotional defaults. If your system is used to scanning for danger, you can practice inviting balance by also scanning for safety. Not instead of threat, but alongside it. This balanced attention becomes emotional maturity, the ability to hold both joy and fear, grief and gratitude, uncertainty and hope. Some emotions require expression before they release. Others simply need to be witnessed. Crying, for example, is not just a symptom of sadness. It is a biological regulation tool. Emotional tears contain different chemicals than reflex tears, and crying can activate parasympathetic responses, slowing heart rate, softening breath. This is why crying can bring calm, even if nothing externally has changed. The release is real, but it doesn't always have to be dramatic. Emotional release can also happen through writing, movement, music, or silence. What matters is not how you express, but that you let the emotional circuit complete. Suppressed emotion doesn't disappear. It often finds alternate routes through tension, fatigue, restlessness, or even illness. The body holds what the voice cannot express. That's why emotional expression is not a luxury. It is a form of care. You are not being dramatic by feeling deeply. You are being accurate. You are responding to what your system has registered, whether consciously or not. And sometimes the emotion is not current. It is old. A new experience has touched a buried memory, and the reaction belongs partly to the past. This can be confusing. Why does this small moment feel so intense? Why do I feel abandoned, rejected, exposed? Often the answer is that the emotional pattern has been activated, not just by the present, but by echoes of what came before. These echoes are powerful. The nervous system doesn't timestamp emotion the way your mind does. It treats the emotional pattern as current until updated. That's why healing often involves revisiting old stories, not to dwell in pain, but to offer new outcomes, to bring kindness where there was once judgment, to bring understanding where there was confusion, to bring calm where there was chaos. These revisions, done in safety, can gradually change how the nervous system responds to similar cues in the future. Relationships play a central role in this process. Connection is one of the most powerful regulators of emotion. When you are seen, heard, and understood, the nervous system relaxes. When you are judged, ignored, or rejected, it contracts. We often think of love as a feeling, but biologically, love is regulation. It is the nervous system interpreting another person as a source of safety. That's why being held can bring tears, why eye contact can soften panic, why a calm voice can feel like medicine. These are not metaphors. They are real responses in the vagus nerve, in the limbic system, in the breath. And the opposite is also true. Neglect, coldness, criticism, these can activate distress responses sometimes more deeply than physical danger, because connection is survival. Your system knows this. That is why social pain can feel physical. Rejection and exclusion light up the same brain areas as injury. The pain is real, not imagined. Understanding this can shift how you treat yourself and others. It reminds you that emotion is not always about logic. It is about what the nervous system has learned to expect. And expectations are powerful. If you expect criticism, praise might feel confusing. If you expect abandonment, kindness might trigger suspicion. The nervous system prepares based on history, not philosophy. And so healing becomes the work of offering new history, small, repeated moments of safety, predictable kindness, gentle correction of old patterns. This work is slow but profound. It does not always feel dramatic. Often it feels like ordinary moments, a conversation that doesn't explode, a truth spoken without punishment, a hand held through discomfort. These are the bricks of emotional repair, and over time they build new foundations. Some feelings do not demand action, they simply want to be acknowledged. And this can be one of the most difficult emotional skills to develop, the ability to sit with a feeling without rushing to fix it, avoid it, or explain it away. In a world that prizes speed, productivity, and clarity, stillness with emotion can feel foreign. But stillness is not inaction. It is presence. It is the space in which understanding can grow. Many emotional patterns remain stuck because they are never fully felt. They are paused mid-sentence, interrupted by shame, distraction, or pressure to perform wellness. But emotion wants to complete its arc. It moves like a wave, rising, cresting, and settling. When you resist or suppress it, you freeze the wave. It lingers, waiting for attention, sometimes growing sharper in its demand. But when you create a safe container, time, space, breath, emotion often moves through, leaving insight in its place. This movement is natural. The body knows how to feel. What often blocks it is judgment, the story that certain emotions are wrong, weak, dangerous, or too much. These stories are learned, and like all stories, they can be rewritten. You can teach your system that anger is not inherently harmful, that grief is not a threat to function, that joy is not something to apologize for. You can remind yourself that every emotion has a role, a rhythm, and a message. And the more often you listen, the clearer that message becomes. This kind of emotional listening is not about analysis. It is about attention, a kind of quiet curiosity that says, what is this feeling trying to protect? What does it want me to know? Not in the abstract, but in this moment, in this body, in this breath. You might notice that certain feelings have specific locations in the body. Tension in the shoulders, hollowness in the chest, a knot in the stomach. These physical signals are not random. They are the body's language for emotion. And the more fluently you learn to listen, the less confusing your inner world becomes. The mind may lie or forget, but the body remembers. It keeps score, as some say, but it also keeps rhythm, the pulse of presence, the temperature of truth, the sensation of unfinished stories waiting to be told. You do not need to tell them all at once. You do not need to understand everything right now. What matters is that you start to trust that your emotions have wisdom, not always the kind of wisdom that leads to immediate answers, but the kind that points toward authenticity. In this process, one of the most powerful shifts is the transition from judgment to naming. When you label a feeling, this is anger, this is envy, this is relief, you create just enough space between you and the experience to observe it. This is not detachment, it is respectful witnessing. It allows you to hold the emotion rather than be swallowed by it. Neuroscience shows that naming emotions reduces activity in the amygdala, the brain's alarm system, and increases activity in the prefrontal cortex, which supports regulation and choice. In simple terms, naming calms. It tells the system, this is understandable, this can be handled. And over time, this practice builds a kind of internal emotional vocabulary, a library of felt experiences that gives you more options, more nuance, more clarity. Instead of living in broad strokes, happy, sad, mad, you begin to notice the subtleties: irritated, wistful, tender, overwhelmed, content, wary, grateful. These distinctions matter. They change how you respond. They make it easier to communicate with others, and they help you understand your own needs with greater precision. But the goal is not emotional control. It is emotional cooperation. You are not trying to suppress or eliminate feelings. You are trying to live with them wisely, to make space for them without letting them drive every decision, to respect their messages without obeying their every demand. This is what emotional maturity looks like. Not perfection, but partnership. You and your emotions working together to navigate life. And like any partnership, it requires honesty, compassion, and flexibility. Sometimes you will get it wrong. You will misread a signal, overreact, underreact, speak too soon, stay too silent. That's part of the learning process. What matters is that you return to the breath, to the body, to the question, what is this really about? What does this part of me need? Often the answer is surprisingly simple: to be heard, to be safe, to be held. And when you offer yourself that, the emotional intensity often softens. Not because the problem is solved, but because the system knows it is not alone. Loneliness, in fact, is not only social, it can be internal, the experience of being divided from your own emotional self. When you ignore, dismiss, or belittle your feelings, you create an internal exile. A part of you feels abandoned. Over time, this can lead to numbness, disconnection, even depression, not because the feelings disappeared, but because they were denied a voice. But even in that silence, the emotional system waits. It does not punish. It does not give up. It waits for your return. And when you do return, with kindness, with presence, with breath, even if the words are clumsy or the timing awkward, that part of you begins to soften. The wall becomes a window. The numbness begins to thaw. This is how emotional healing begins, not with grand insight, but with quiet attention. A hand placed over the heart, a sentence spoken aloud in an empty room, a journal page that says, "I'm here, I'm listening." These small acts matter. They send a signal, and the nervous system responds to signals. Safety is not just the absence of threat, it is the presence of welcome. When your system feels safe, it opens. Breath deepens, muscles release, awareness widens. This state is not passive, it is receptive. It is the biological foundation for growth, rest, connection, and creativity. You cannot force safety, you must invite it. And that invitation begins with how you treat your own experience. Do you scold your fear, or do you ask what it's trying to guard? Do you shame your sadness, or do you sit with it like a guest who's traveled far to see you? These choices are subtle but powerful. They shape your emotional landscape over time. They determine whether your inner world becomes a place of conflict or care. And when care becomes the default, something beautiful happens. You begin to feel safer in your own presence. This does not mean you never feel pain. It means that pain is no longer synonymous with danger. You can hurt and still feel grounded. You can cry and still feel whole. You can lose and still feel held. This emotional foundation ripples outward into your relationships. When you regulate your own system, you create space for others to do the same. You become a source of calm, a grounding presence, not because you are always composed, but because you are honest. You know how to return, and that return to breath, to truth, to care becomes a kind of emotional gravity. People feel it. They trust it. Not everyone will respond well. Some people are not ready for that kind of clarity, but the right people will feel the resonance. Emotional maturity attracts emotional honesty, and in that honesty, deeper connection becomes possible. Not performance, not perfection, but presence. Two nervous systems speaking without words. Two people sharing the weight of reality, not pretending to float above it. This is intimacy. This is empathy in action. It does not always look dramatic. Often it looks like sitting in silence without fixing, like staying present when someone says something hard, like allowing your own tears without apology, like saying, "I'm here," and meaning it, for them and for yourself. The nervous system is a storyteller. It learns through repetition, through rhythm, through response, and you are both the listener and the narrator. Every time you meet emotion with care, you rewrite a line in that story. Every time you stay instead of flee, breathe instead of brace, name instead of judge, the plot shifts. Not all at once, not dramatically, but steadily, like water carving stone, like warmth thawing ice. Emotional transformation is not lightning. It is weather. It is a season that changes slowly, then suddenly. And as the climate shifts, new possibilities grow. Emotions that once overwhelmed now inform. Triggers that once hijacked now signal. Patterns that once ruled now loosen. And in their place, presence, clarity, choice, not freedom from emotion, but freedom with emotion. The kind of freedom that comes from knowing you are allowed to feel, from knowing that feeling does not erase your strength, from knowing that the inner world, no matter how turbulent, is never your enemy. It is your home. Emotion has its own kind of memory, not like a timeline of facts, but a body of impressions. Sometimes your body will remember something before your mind does. You walk into a room and feel uneasy, though nothing seems wrong. You meet someone new and feel a strange comfort, as if they're familiar. These responses are not random. They are the nervous system recalling patterns. You may not consciously remember every moment of fear, warmth, rejection, or belonging, but your body often does. The heartbeat quickens, the breath shallows, the muscles tighten or soften in anticipation of a pattern it recognizes. This is predictive processing at work. The nervous system constantly scanning for familiar cues to prepare you for what might happen next. It is a survival mechanism, but it is also an emotional compass. It tells you not only what is happening, but what it feels like is happening. And that distinction matters, because not all emotional responses reflect the present moment. Some are echoes, and in recognizing the echo, you create the opportunity to choose differently. Awareness allows for interruption. If a part of you flinches when you hear a certain tone, awareness can pause before reaction. You can ask, is this moment the same as the one I'm remembering? Is this threat current or historic? Is this person the one who hurt me or someone who simply reminds me of them? These questions are not accusations. They are anchors. They bring you back to the present where your power lives. And power, in the emotional sense, is not about control over others. It's about choice within yourself. The choice to respond rather than react. The choice to stay open when you want to close. The choice to name your truth even when your voice shakes. These are not small choices. They are emotional revolutions. Each one rewrites a rule that fear once wrote. Each one expands the range of who you're allowed to be. And who you're allowed to be is often shaped by early emotional lessons. What feelings were welcomed? What feelings were punished? Were you comforted when you cried or told to be strong? Were you allowed to express anger or taught that silence was safer? These early experiences form emotional templates. They teach the nervous system what's acceptable and what's dangerous, and these templates can last for decades, even if the circumstances have changed. That's why someone can still feel guilty for resting even when no one is judging them anymore. Why someone can still fear rejection in healthy relationships. Why someone can struggle to express joy even in moments of success. The nervous system remembers the emotional rules it learned early, not because it's stubborn, but because those rules once ensured safety. Changing them requires not blame, but compassion. You're not broken for having outdated patterns. You're human, and humanity is defined by adaptation. This adaptability is why emotional healing is possible at any age. You don't need to undo the past. You need to offer the present enough new experiences to gently revise what emotion expects. This might look like allowing yourself to rest without guilt, speaking your needs even if they shake, staying kind when your instinct is to retreat. Each time you offer your nervous system a new kind of safety, you expand its emotional vocabulary. It learns that protection can look like softness, not just defense. That strength can include vulnerability. That survival is not the only goal. Connection, expression, and presence are goals too. Presence is not just being in a room, it's being in your body, feeling the moment without jumping ahead or rehearsing the past. This is harder than it sounds, because the mind loves to wander. It scans for threat, for opportunity, for meaning. And while this scanning is natural, it can also become a trap, especially when emotion is intense. You might find yourself replaying conversations, rehearsing arguments, predicting worst-case outcomes. These loops feel like preparation, but often they are avoidance in disguise. Avoidance of sitting with the raw feeling underneath, the fear, the sadness, the longing, the shame. But if you can stay in the present moment, even briefly, something else becomes possible. The feeling can be felt fully, not just analyzed. And when a feeling is fully felt, it often moves, not away but through. It changes shape, it carries information, it teaches. That teaching is not always verbal. Emotion teaches through experience, through breath, through presence, through patterns noticed and patterns broken. You might realize that your anxiety always rises at the same hour, that your sadness deepens in a particular room. That joy appears when you slow down, when you move your body, when you connect without pressure. These insights matter. They give you tools, not to eliminate emotion, but to live more skillfully with it. Skillful emotional living is not emotionless. It is full of feeling, but also full of choice, context, and care. You still get angry, but you know when it masks fear. You still feel overwhelmed, but you've learned how to ground. You still grieve, but you no longer mistake it for brokenness. Grief, especially, is one of the most misunderstood emotions. It does not follow a tidy path. It loops, fades, returns, surprises. It is not only about death. It can arise after any loss, a relationship, a role, a dream, a version of yourself. And grief doesn't always look like tears. Sometimes it's exhaustion, numbness, irritation, restlessness. Sometimes it's a longing for something you can't quite name. Grief speaks in many languages, and it is not a problem to solve. It is a process to honor, one that changes you, one that reveals what mattered, one that asks for slowing down, for gentleness, for patience. In the presence of grief, advice often fails. What matters most is presence, someone willing to sit nearby without fixing, someone who says, "I see that you're hurting, I'm here." You can be that person for yourself, and when you are, grief becomes less lonely. It still aches, but it doesn't isolate in the same way. You remember that pain is part of being alive, that love leaves traces, that memory is sacred even when it stings. As you deepen your relationship with emotion, you begin to recognize that every feeling has a rhythm, a tempo. Some rush in, others creep, some linger like fog, others spark like lightning. And when you learn your emotional rhythms, you stop fearing them. You stop mistaking them for verdicts. You start seeing them as weather, sometimes stormy, sometimes calm, always changing. You begin to trust that no emotional state lasts forever, that the wave will rise, crest, and fall, that you don't need to panic at the first drop of rain. You've seen storms before. You know how to light the candle, brew the tea, call the friend, sit quietly until the wind shifts. This trust is emotional resilience, not the absence of feeling, but the presence of inner tools. Tools you've built over time. Tools no one can see, but that shape everything. These tools are built in small moments, when you pause before reacting, when you breathe before speaking, when you name what you feel instead of denying it, when you offer yourself compassion instead of criticism, when you rest without apologizing, when you forgive without forgetting, when you begin again gently. Each moment is a stitch in the fabric of your emotional life, and that fabric is what holds you when things fall apart. It's what warms you when life turns cold. It's what connects you to others, not through performance, but through shared humanity. Because everyone feels, everyone struggles, everyone has a nervous system trying to make sense of the world. And the more you honor yours, the more you honor theirs. The nervous system, at its core, is relational. It was built not only to help you survive physical threats, but also to help you belong. That drive for connection is not a modern invention, it is ancient. To the brain and body, loneliness is a kind of danger. Social disconnection activates some of the same brain regions as physical pain. You can't always see it on someone's face, but the pain of being left out, dismissed, or forgotten is real and measurable. Even micro moments of disconnection, a text left unanswered, a turned back, a withdrawn tone, can register as emotional threat. This does not make you needy or weak, it makes you human. The nervous system is attuned to these small signals because for most of human history, safety came from togetherness. To be part of a group was to have warmth, food, protection. To be cast out was to risk everything. That truth still lives in your biology. It's why your heart races when you think someone is upset with you, why rejection can haunt you longer than you expected, why being understood can feel like being seen for the first time in years. And yet, despite this longing for connection, many people have learned to armor themselves against intimacy. Not because they don't care, but because caring once hurt. So they become fluent in distance. They joke instead of share. They advise instead of listen. They work instead of feel. This isn't dishonesty, it's protection. Somewhere along the way, vulnerability was punished through betrayal, abandonment, misunderstanding. So now the nervous system flinches when intimacy draws near. This reaction can be confusing, especially when part of you wants closeness, but another part pulls away. One hand reaching, the other held tight behind your back. This internal conflict is not a flaw. It's an intelligent response to an emotional history that taught you caution. And caution is not your enemy. It's a signal, a request for more safety, more slowness, more choice. You can honor that request. You can pace yourself. You can choose who gets to know you, how much, and when. And you can notice how the body feels in their presence. Does your breath deepen or shallow? Does your chest open or close? Does your jaw clench or release? These cues matter more than words. They are data. They tell you if your system recognizes safety. And safety, remember, is not the same as comfort. Some people are familiar, but not safe. Some situations are easy, but not nourishing. Safety is deeper. It is the nervous system's quiet yes, a yes that says, I can be here. I don't need to brace. I don't need to shrink. I can bring my full self into this space without needing to monitor every move. You may not have grown up with this kind of safety. You may have learned to monitor, to manage, to perform. But the beauty of emotional growth is that safety can be rebuilt. It begins in small ways, by telling the truth in low-risk moments, by allowing silence without rushing to fill it, by noticing your own needs before they explode into urgency. These habits send a message to your nervous system. I am paying attention. I am not abandoning you. I will not gaslight your signals. And the more consistently you do this, the more your inner world begins to settle. Settling doesn't mean dullness, it means coherence. When your emotions, thoughts, and body are in agreement, something clicks. You feel aligned, grounded, present. Even in the face of stress, you can sense yourself as a whole person, not just a scattered reaction. This is the quiet confidence that grows from emotional attunement, and it's contagious. When you become more regulated, you begin to regulate others without trying. Your calm becomes a lighthouse, your tone becomes a balm. You start to notice how people lean toward you when you speak slowly, how they soften when you pause before replying, how their defenses lower when yours don't rise to meet them. This is co-regulation, not as strategy, but as presence. The nervous systems of those around you tune to yours, and you tune to theirs. This happens whether you intend it or not. So the more intentional you become with your own regulation, the more healing you offer without words. But emotional healing is not linear. Some days you feel clear, grounded, open. Other days, it's like the old stories return, uninvited. The fear, the anger, the shame. This doesn't mean you failed. It means you're human. The nervous system doesn't forget overnight. It learns through experience, repetition, relationship. The healing path loops, revisits, spirals. You might face the same fear from a new angle. You might cry over something you thought was long processed. You might feel tired of the work. That too is part of the process. Rest is not regression. Pausing is not quitting. Integration takes time, and sometimes the system needs quiet to process what you've already learned. Let yourself have that quiet. Let yourself exist without constant analysis. Let yourself be a body, not just a brain. There is wisdom in not always knowing, in feeling instead, in trusting the slow intelligence of your inner world. This trust can be hard-earned, especially if you've experienced gaslighting from others or from yourself. You may have learned to doubt your own perception, to second-guess your feelings, to outsource your truth to someone else's reaction. This habit erodes self-trust. It makes you question whether you're too sensitive, too much, too irrational. But emotion is not irrational. It is data. Sometimes distorted, yes, but still data. Still worth hearing. The work of rebuilding trust in your emotional self starts with permission. The permission to feel without performance. To say, this is my feeling right now. I don't need to explain it to deserve support. You may find yourself asking others to validate what you already know. Was that weird? Did I overreact? Is it okay to feel this way? These are echoes of emotional abandonment, when the people who were supposed to reflect your reality instead denied it, belittled it, or ignored it. So now you ask the world to be your mirror. But the healing begins when you become that mirror, when you look inward and say, I believe you. Believing yourself doesn't mean acting on every feeling. It means listening without silencing. You can feel jealous without acting possessively. You can feel angry without becoming cruel. You can feel afraid and still move forward. Emotional maturity is not about being unshakable. It's about being honest and kind, even when shaken. It's about making room for the entire emotional spectrum without letting any one feeling become the dictator of your actions. It's about creating internal space, the kind of space that allows you to breathe between stimulus and response. That breath is your power. In that breath, you can ask, is this reaction mine or inherited? Is it from now or from then? Is it true or is it familiar? These questions are not meant to paralyze you in introspection. They're meant to widen your lens, to give you options, because emotion narrows when it's intense, but your capacity is larger than that. You are not just your worst moment, not just your sharpest fear, not just your oldest story. And slowly, with practice, those stories begin to shift, not because they were lies, but because they're incomplete. You are not only the child who was scared, or the teen who was hurt, or the adult who was betrayed. You are also the one who is healing, noticing, growing. You are the witness now, not just the actor. You get to choose how the story continues. And sometimes that choice is as simple as breathing deeper, speaking softer, resting longer, asking for clarity, saying no sooner, saying yes with less guilt. All of these are acts of emotional repair, not because they're dramatic, but because they are different from what the old pattern predicted. They are interruptions. They are alternatives. They are proof to your nervous system that the world and your place in it is changing. There is a kind of intelligence that arises when you slow down, when you're not rushing to manage the moment or optimize your life, when you allow yourself to just be here, breathing, sensing, listening. In this stillness, a different kind of knowing emerges, not intellectual, but embodied, the kind that doesn't arrive in sentences, but in sensations. A tightness that says you need rest, a flutter that says something matters, a lump in the throat that says words are waiting. Most of us are trained to ignore this kind of intelligence. We override the body's cues with plans, with politeness, with pressure to keep moving. But the nervous system never stops speaking. Even when ignored, it sends its signals, and the longer they go unheard, the louder they get, sometimes through illness, sometimes through mood, sometimes through an aching emptiness you can't explain. This is not weakness. This is wisdom unmet. Your system wants coherence, not conflict. It wants to be heard, not handled. And when you start to listen, not just with your ears, but with your whole attention, it begins to settle. The anxiety softens, the urgency fades, the noise becomes signal. Listening deeply means allowing space for what arises, even when it's uncomfortable, especially then. Some feelings only emerge when they sense you're ready. They've been buried not out of shame, but out of protection. The anger that was never safe to feel, the grief that had no place to land, the joy that felt too vulnerable to share. These emotions are not gone. They're waiting, behind the noise, beneath the busy, for welcome. And when they are finally given that welcome, something shifts. The pressure lifts. The inner world begins to rearrange, not in a burst, but in small organic ways. You speak more honestly, you cry more freely, you laugh more fully, you say no without guilt. You begin to trust that you can feel and still be okay, that you can soften without breaking, that you can be tender and still be strong. Strength, after all, is not rigidity, it is responsiveness. The tree that bends in the wind survives the storm. The nervous system too needs to bend, to adapt, to respond. This flexibility is not just mental, it's biological. A regulated system can shift between states, from focused to relaxed, from active to restful, from alert to receptive. But trauma and chronic stress can freeze this flexibility. They lock the system into patterns of overdrive or shutdown, always on edge or always numb. You might find yourself unable to rest even when tired, or unable to act even when necessary. This isn't laziness or weakness. It's a nervous system doing its best with the tools it has. And the good news is, tools can change. Through practice, through presence, through safety, the system can learn to move again, to come out of hiding, to trust rhythm, to believe in the possibility of ease. Ease is not the absence of effort. It is effort without struggle. It is what happens when your actions align with your needs, when you say what you mean without rehearsing, when you feel what you feel without apology, when your inner world matches your outer expression. This congruence is rare, but it is healing, because much of emotional pain comes from the split between what we feel and what we show. We smile when we want to scream. We stay silent when we want to speak. We perform okay when we are not. And this gap between inner truth and outer behavior wears us down. It creates dissonance, confusion, isolation. It teaches the nervous system that expression is unsafe, that truth is dangerous. Over time, it disconnects us from our own aliveness. But when we close that gap, even a little, the whole system breathes. It says, finally, I'm being honest. Finally, I don't have to pretend. This honesty is a gift to yourself and to others, because when you speak your truth gently, it gives others permission to do the same. When you feel without flinching, it shows others that feelings are not fatal. When you listen without fixing, it teaches others that presence is powerful. This is emotional leadership, not loud, not flashy, but deep. A way of being that creates space, that holds contradiction, that honors the slow work of becoming. And becoming is slow. It's not a straight line. It's not a checklist. It's a spiral, a tide, a dance. You revisit old wounds with new eyes. You face new challenges with old fears. You learn, unlearn, relearn, and through it all, you remain, still breathing, still listening, still capable of change. Change, when it's real, is often quiet. It shows up in how you pause before reacting, in how you stay when you would have run, in how you soften when you would have clenched, in how you ask for help when silence once seemed safer. These are small shifts on the surface, but underneath they are seismic. They mean your nervous system is trusting something new, that you are not only surviving, you are relating, you are choosing, you are healing. Healing doesn't always feel good. Sometimes it's messy, disorienting, exhausting, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. It means the system is reorganizing, making space, letting go, learning how to live without the armor. Armor has its place. Sometimes it's necessary, but if worn too long, it becomes a cage. It keeps out the bad, but also the good. It protects, but it isolates. Eventually, the cost outweighs the safety, and the body starts to ask, quietly at first, then louder, for release. Not all at once, not dramatically, but gently, a loosening, a letting down, a softening towards something truer, toward the self beneath the shell. That self is not fragile, it's resilient, because resilience isn't about bouncing back, it's about adapting forward, about becoming someone new because of what you've been through, not in spite of it. And that new self carries the wisdom of the journey, the scars, yes, but also the strengths, the tenderness, the insight, the ability to hold space for yourself and for others. As you continue to deepen your understanding of your inner world, you may begin to notice a subtle but profound shift in how you experience reality itself, because emotion is not merely a response to events, but the texture of experience that shapes how every moment feels. It is the lens through which the nervous system interprets both the seen and unseen, the spoken and unspoken. And as you slow down enough to feel beneath the surface of thought, you begin to sense how interconnected every part of your experience really is. Body and mind, sensation and meaning, memory and moment, perception and action, and that nothing in your emotional life exists in isolation, because each feeling arises not just from the present moment, but from the vast web of all the moments that came before, woven together in patterns your nervous system learned long ago, patterns that once helped you survive, belong, and adapt, but that may now persist long after their original purpose has passed, shaping your reactions in ways you hardly noticed until you began to pay attention. Emotion, in this view, is not a disturbance to be corrected, but a current running through life, carrying signals of value, urgency, attention, threat, connection, and possibility. And when you begin to recognize that your feelings are not random flashes, but currents of meaning, alive with memory and pattern and anticipation, you start to notice how much your internal landscape influences your outward behavior, not as a burden, but as a guide, and from this perspective, the nervous system reveals itself not as a tyrant, but as a navigator that is constantly matching what is happening now with what has happened before in order to predict what might come next. This predictive nature is adaptive, but it can also narrow your experience if it constantly assumes danger where none exists or safety where harm is still possible, which is why emotional competence, the ability to feel fully yet respond wisely, is not a fixed trait but a living skill that grows through practice, presence, and repeated evidence that new patterns of safety and trust can be learned. When you pause between feeling and action, when you breathe into discomfort rather than brace against it, when you allow yourself to be fully seen without hiding, the nervous system begins to register not threat but welcome, and this shifts its default expectations, changing how you perceive future moments. This is not instant change, but it is real change. And over time, the small moments of attunement accumulate into a new internal landscape, where the nervous system no longer assumes threat by default, but begins to expect safety, connection, and coherence. You may notice that your awareness of bodily signals becomes sharper, that micro-sensations, a tightening in the shoulders, a warmth in the chest, a flutter in the stomach, become your compass, guiding your attention toward what matters and away from what no longer serves you. And you realize that these physical signals are not obstacles, but data about your internal state, like weather reports from within that tell you when to move forward and when to rest. This embodied awareness allows you to distinguish not only between different emotions, but different degrees and combinations of them, that you can feel joy and fear at the same time, or relief and sadness, or love and frustration, and that these complex blends are not signs of confusion, but evidence of a rich, emotional life that refuses to be flattened into simple categories. As you allow this richness to be present, you begin to feel less reactive and more responsive, not because you are never affected by events, but because you have developed the capacity to hold emotion with clarity rather than being swept up by it. And this clarity brings with it a sense of freedom that is subtle yet profound, because freedom is not the absence of feeling, but the ability to experience feeling without being governed by it. As you become more familiar with this internal landscape, you begin to notice how emotional resonance travels between people, because humans are wired for connection. Your nervous system unconsciously mirrors the expressions, tone, posture, and breath patterns of those around you. And when you are regulated internally, this co-regulation becomes a source of strength, not vulnerability, allowing you to be present without being overwhelmed by another's distress. This is not emotional fusion, but a kind of empathic stability, where you can feel without losing your center, where you can offer presence without draining yourself, and this quality of presence becomes a source of comfort and trust in relationships, not because you are perfect, but because you are steady in your own emotional coherence. Relationships themselves then become arenas for mutual regulation, where two nervous systems learn not only from one another's signals, but from the patterns of safety and attunement that arise between them, teaching each other what it feels like to be seen, heard, respected, and understood. Over time, this relational attunement shapes how you show up in the world. You become not only more aware of your own internal rhythms, but more sensitive to the rhythms of others, recognizing when someone else's nervous system is guarded, reactive, or shut down, and responding not with judgment, but with gentle presence, a quiet invitation to safety. This shift is not dramatic in a single moment, but it is transformative in the long arc of experience, because the small acts of attunement, a warm look, a slow breath, a steady voice, accumulate into relational trust, and trust itself becomes a buffer against distress, a foundation for vulnerability, a space where emotional honesty is welcomed rather than feared. As this capacity grows, you may find that familiar triggers still arise, that old emotional wounds still echo when something resonates with the past. But now you see these moments not as regressions, but as opportunities for integration, moments when the nervous system brings up old material not to punish you, but to reprocess it with a greater resource base than before, because you now have tools of awareness, regulation, and compassionate presence that were not there earlier in life. This is how emotional healing works, not by erasing the past, but by revising the story the nervous system tells about it, by giving the body new evidence that the present moment is not the same as the old danger. So the pattern begins to loosen its grip, and little by little, the emotional response becomes more measured, more adaptable, more nuanced. You learn that fear can inform caution without immobilizing you, that sadness can deepen your empathy without isolating you, that anger can show you where boundaries matter without becoming a weapon, that joy can open your sense of possibility without blinding you to complexity. These distinctions are not abstract concepts, but living experiences that you notice in the way your breath feels, in the color of your attention, in the rhythm of your heartbeat, in the quality of your posture. And as your familiarity with these subtle emotional patterns increases, you begin to shape your inner world not by force, but by curiosity, treating your feelings not as problems to solve, but as teachers, guiding you toward what matters, toward what nourishes connection and meaning, toward what invites growth rather than avoidance. In this way, emotion becomes not a burden, but a collaborator, an ongoing conversation between body and mind that you learn to listen to with care. And this listening is what gives you agency, not control over life, but mastery of how you navigate it with attention, compassion, and choice. You begin to notice that emotional maturity is not about being untouched by difficulty, but about being present amid it, able to hold contradictions, to carry tenderness without fear, to experience depth without drowning, to remain rooted even when the winds of experience gust unpredictably. And this presence, this capacity to embrace the full range of feeling without being governed by it, becomes a source not of detachment, but of connection, because you no longer seek refuge in numbness or distraction, but allow yourself to be fully seen, and in being seen, you see others more clearly, with empathy that is not overwhelming but steady, not draining but sustaining. This is the heart of emotional intelligence, the ability not to suppress emotion but to interpret it, to move with it, to let it inform your choices without dictating them, to weave your internal world into your relationships, your decisions, your creative expression, and your sense of purpose. And as this capacity grows, you begin to experience life not as a battleground of internal conflict, but as a dynamic landscape where emotion is a guide that reveals values, boundaries, needs, and connections, a guide that, when listened to with clarity and care, leads you toward authenticity, presence, and a deep sense of belonging to yourself, to others, and to the living moment you are experiencing right now. Emotion is not a momentary spark. It is a continuous river of experience that flows through every second of your life, shaping how you perceive the world, how you interpret others, how you remember the past, and how you anticipate the future. And as you deepen into emotional awareness, you begin to notice how much of life is filtered through this ongoing current of feeling, how your inner world never actually pauses, even when your mind is still, because beneath the surface of conscious thought, there is a vast network of signals, memories, predictions, and interpretations that are happening all the time. And these processes are what make your experience rich rather than flat, meaningful rather than random, and connected rather than isolated. But that richness also comes with complexity, because emotion is not a single signal you can switch on or off, but a layered interplay of physiology, memory, attention, and meaning that is constantly updating in real time based on your internal state and external circumstances. And this means that emotional life is never entirely predictable, never entirely controlled, and never entirely static. And yet within that uncertainty, there is a kind of order, a pattern, a rhythm, a structure that emerges when you, Pay sustained attention to it, and this structure is what you begin to see as you learn to feel with awareness rather than react from the past. You begin to notice that your emotional reactions are deeply influenced by the stories you carry, the hidden assumptions you make, the unmet needs you hold, and the survival strategies you learned long before you had the words for them. And when you start to notice these influences, you also begin to see that emotions are not merely feelings that happen to you, but messages, powerful, ancient, biological signals that are trying to tell you something about what your nervous system believes is happening right now, based not only on the present stimulus, but also on the shape of your past, the signatures of your upbringing, the ways your body has learned to interpret certain cues as safe or unsafe, and the ways your mind projects possible futures based on what it has learned to expect. And this means that emotion is not a problem to be solved, but a messenger to be listened to, because beneath every surge of fear, every flare of anger, every ache of sadness, every warmth of joy, there is information about what your system interprets as important, relevant, and meaningful at that moment. And when you begin to treat these signals as worthy of curiosity rather than as nuisances to be suppressed or fixed, the nervous system begins to calm, not because it stops responding, but because it feels heard, understood, and valued as part of you, rather than as something foreign to be pushed away. This shift from suppression to curiosity with compassion is one of the most profound transitions in emotional life, because it moves you from battle to dialogue, from resistance to relationship, from conflict to coherence. And as this dialogue deepens, you begin to notice patterns in your emotional landscape that once felt invisible, like the way your mood changes with subtle bodily cues, how your posture influences your internal state, how your breath can shape your experience before you even form a thought, and how your interpretation of someone's expression can shift the entire tenor of your inner weather in an instant. And when you observe these patterns over time, you begin to see not chaos but architecture, an emotional grammar that underlies your experience, a grammar that speaks in sensations, impulses, meanings, expectations, and memories rather than in words. And once you recognize this grammar, you gain a kind of fluency, the ability to listen to your inner signals with less judgment and more understanding, the ability to notice the difference between a body in danger and a mind replaying the past, the capacity to distinguish between threat and uncertainty, between discomfort and alarm, and to respond to each appropriately rather than allowing one to masquerade as the other. And this capacity, this fluency, becomes a source of resilience, not because you never feel difficult emotions again, but because you can sit with them without being consumed by them, because you know you are not lost, you are learning, and learning always happens in relationship with curiosity, presence, and self-compassion. And it is in this relational stance toward yourself that emotional maturity blossoms, not as perfection, but as attention and practice, a continued willingness to notice what arises, to stay with it, to breathe into it, to remember that feelings are not verdicts but guides, not enemies but teachers. And as you navigate this landscape, you may notice that your sense of time itself begins to shift, because when you are fully present with an emotion, it feels larger, richer, more textured, more immediate, not because it is overwhelming, but because your attention is undivided, not fragmented by worry or autopilot. And this fullness of attention is its own kind of healing, teaching your system that the present moment, with all its sensations and signals, is safe enough to meet with awareness rather than fear. And this safety is not absolute or perfect, but relational and practice-based, something earned, not assumed. And as you continue to show up for your own inner experience again and again, something remarkable happens. You begin to trust your own presence, not only for joy and calm, but also for complexity, difficulty, and confusion, because you have learned that staying does not mean being overwhelmed, that breathing through tension does not mean collapse, that uncertainty does not always mean danger, and that vulnerability, though once terrifying, can become a bridge toward connection rather than a signal of isolation. And this is especially true in relationships, because as you become more attuned to your own emotional world, you also become more sensitive to the emotional worlds of others, not in a draining or engulfing way, but in a way that recognizes them as fellow humans with inner landscapes as rich and fraught as your own. And this recognition deepens connection because you do not speak at others or over them, but you listen with the same compassionate attention you have learned to offer yourself. And when two people meet in this way, there is a resonance that feels like safety. Ambiguity becomes tolerable, complexity becomes richness, confusion becomes curiosity, and presence becomes a shared ground rather than a solo performance. And this relational shift is not just about feeling good or avoiding pain, but about deepening intimacy with your own experience and with the experience of others, so that emotion becomes not a barrier, but a bridge, guiding you toward alignment rather than division, toward understanding rather than judgment, toward mutual regulation rather than reactive escalation. And this kind of connection, slow, steady, grounded in awareness and care, transforms your relational patterns not overnight but over time, as the nervous system learns not only to tolerate closeness but to seek it wisely, not as dependency or enmeshment, but as co-regulation, reciprocal presence, shared safety, and mutual attunement. And in this mutual attunement, you discover that vulnerability is not weakness, but risk with boundaries, courage with context, and openness with awareness. And that emotional intimacy is not a loss of self, but the expansion of self into a shared field of connection where each person remains distinct yet open, responsive rather than reactive, expressive rather than defensive. And this kind of emotional relationship becomes a mirror of your internal coherence, reflecting back to you the patterns you have learned to hold with awareness rather than avoidance, showing you not only what you feel, but how you feel it, and how those feelings can become paths to connection rather than barriers to it. And as this process continues, you begin to notice something else. The world itself feels a little less threatening, not because danger has vanished, but because your system no longer interprets uncertainty, conflict, or unpredictability as default peril. And this shift in interpretation expands your emotional range, allowing you to engage with life more fully. The quiet moments of peace, the surprising twists of curiosity, the gentle warmth of connection, the sharp lessons of struggle, the open horizons of possibility, all of it becoming part of the tapestry of experience you can meet with presence rather than avoidance. And this capacity to meet life with presence, balanced, nuanced, compassionate, curious, is what emotional intelligence ultimately looks like. Not absence of discomfort, but the ability to navigate discomfort with steadiness, to honor complexity without confusion, to engage with depth without collapse, to relate with honesty without aggression, to express with clarity without projection, to listen with attention without enmeshment. And this way of being does not make life predictable or problem-free, but it makes you more capable of living fully within it, wherever the currents of experience carry you. And as you embody this relational and emotional competence, you discover that your inner world is not a battlefield to conquer, but a landscape to explore with curiosity, steadiness, and care. A landscape that grows richer and more meaningful the more you attend to it with awareness rather than avoidance. And this ongoing journey, slow, patient, and richly textured, becomes not a destination to reach, but a way of living. One breath, one intention, one compassionate attention at a time. As you settle deeper into the ongoing exploration of your inner world, it becomes clear that emotional life is not a set of isolated episodes, but a flowing landscape of experience that moves through you without pause, shaping not only how you feel, but how you see the world, how you interpret the actions of others, how you remember the past and imagine the future. And the more you learn to attend to this inner landscape with gentle awareness rather than avoidance, the more you begin to notice that emotion is not a problem to be fixed, but a teacher to be understood, a companion in the ongoing conversation between body and mind, between sensation and meaning, between truth and interpretation, where every emotion, whether it feels like joy, fear, sadness, anger, bewilderment, or calm, carries information about your relationship to the moment, your history with certain patterns, and your implicit beliefs about safety and possibility. And when you begin to treat these emotional signals with curiosity rather than judgment, something shifts at a fundamental level. The nervous system, which once interpreted every unfamiliar sensation as a potential threat, gradually learns that not all uncertainty equals danger, that not all intensity requires suppression, that not every surge of feeling means you are in overwhelm, and that your inner world is not hostile territory, but terrain to be navigated with attention and care. And this navigation is not about controlling life's external events, but about responding within them with clarity, wisdom, and presence, which means that you do not become numb, detached, or indifferent, but rather deeply awake to the texture of experience, the fullness of connection, the nuance of pain, the depth of joy, the complexity of longing, the warmth of comfort, and the ebb and flow of uncertainty. And you learn that emotion need not dominate your choices, but can inform them, guiding you toward alignment with your values, your needs, and your relational intentions, rather than toward reaction, avoidance, or defense. This kind of emotional intelligence is not a static trait, but an ongoing practice, a mode of awareness that you bring into every moment, noticing how sensation, interpretation, expectation, and memory all converge to create the felt experience you call emotion. And as you become fluent in this inner language, you begin to recognize patterns that once felt invisible, noticing not only what you feel, but how you feel it, the way your breath changes, the subtle tension or relaxation in your muscles, the way your attention narrows or expands, the micro movements in your body that reflect threat, safety, invitation, or guardedness. And these embodied signals become your early warning system, helping you discern between discomfort that invites attention and danger that calls for action. Not by suppressing emotion, but by listening to it. And as you practice this listening over and over, your responses become less reactive and more responsive, less driven by old survival rules and more guided by present moment awareness. And this responsiveness brings with it a kind of calm strength that feels different from bravado or avoidance. It is an attuned presence, a sense of being alive with your experience rather than separated from it, where breath and sensation are not interruptions to your thinking, but interfaces between body and mind that help you translate internal signals into conscious choice. In this state of attunement, you learn to meet emotional discomfort, not as something to flee, but as information to engage with. And this engagement deepens your capacity for empathy, not only toward others, but toward yourself, because you begin to understand that every person you encounter has an inner landscape just as rich, just as complex, just as worthy of attention as your own. And this recognition dissolves the illusion of separation that so often fuels conflict, judgment, and misunderstanding, revealing instead a shared human terrain of fear, hope, love, loss, aspiration, and meaning. And this shared terrain becomes the foundation for compassion, the ability to resonate with another's experience without being consumed by it, to hold someone in their difficulty without sacrificing your own stability, to offer presence without needing to fix, to listen without needing to respond. And in this way, your relationships deepen not through performance or persuasion, but through mutual attunement, where two people meet each other not as objects to be analyzed, but as worlds to be understood, each with its own internal rhythms, its own patterns of tension and ease, its own history, and its own capacity for growth. And you begin to notice that in emotionally attuned relationships, People feel safe not because there is no conflict or discomfort, but because conflict is navigated with presence rather than avoidance, because discomfort is held with curiosity rather than fear, and because each person learns not only to express their own emotional truth, but to receive the emotional truth of the other with care. A kind of listening that creates space for difference without dissolving identity. A listening that says, I see you, I hear you, I am with you, without needing to change you or fix you. And in these moments of connection, you discover that vulnerability is not a liability, but a doorway to intimacy, a chance to be known not by your defenses, but by your depth. And as your capacity for presence expands, you begin to see emotional life not as a series of problems to be solved, but as a dance between awareness and experience, between openness and boundary, between attention and reflection, where each emotion, each sensation, each inclination is a step in that dance, a step that can be felt, named, understood, and integrated rather than feared, shamed, ignored, or denied. And in this dance, you notice that even the emotions you once resisted, fear, sadness, grief, loneliness, have their own intelligence because they are not signs of deficit but indicators of what matters, pointing to value, connection, loss, desire, boundary, or need. And when you learn to listen to them as guides rather than threats, your world becomes richer, not because it is easier, but because it is more alive, more textured, more meaningful, more present. And this presence transforms not only your internal experience, but your sense of agency, because you no longer act from emotion in a way that feels involuntary, but you act with emotion as a conscious companion to your choice, allowing fear to inform caution without dictating avoidance, allowing anger to signal boundary without driving harm, allowing sadness to deepen care without dissolving hope, allowing joy to expand possibility without neglecting nuance. And this nuanced engagement with emotion becomes a kind of art, not an abstract or aesthetic art, but an art of living that balances sensation, thought, intention, and context in a way that is grounded, embodied, relational, and wise. And as you continue to practice this art, you begin to notice how it influences every corner of your life. Your conversations become more authentic, your presence becomes more steady, your attention becomes more expansive, your capacity for love becomes larger, not because intensity increases, but because understanding deepens. And this understanding is not something you get once and for all, but something you cultivate moment by moment, breath by breath, feeling by feeling, choice by choice, until what once felt confusing now feels like a mastery of inner navigation, not a denial of pain, but a friendship with complexity, not a suppression of vulnerability, but a confidence in presence. And when you look back, you see that the emotional landscape you once feared has become a kind of terrain to walk with curiosity rather than dread, with compassion rather than judgment, with clarity rather than confusion. And in this ongoing living of emotional life, you discover that what you once called turmoil is actually texture. What you once called weakness is openness. What you once called confusion is depth. And what you once feared as vulnerability is actually the capacity to connect deeply with life itself in all its intensity, complexity, and wonder. And this is the culmination of emotional intelligence, not a destination, but a way of living fully, deeply, and with presence. And as you carry this understanding into each day, you realize that emotion is not something to escape or overcome, but a companion in the journey of being human, alive, conscious, connected, and meaningfully present right here, right now.